Hello, everyone, and welcome to another State of the Program episode. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Joe Meade with me, and tonight it's PJ Fleck and the Minnesota Golden Gophers. They finished the year 8-5 overall, 7-5 in the regular season, and 5-4 in the Big Ten. That was good enough for ninth place in the league. Joe, before we get into some of the specifics, what are some of your overall thoughts on the season for Minnesota?
To me, and I don't know, however, whatever fan base you're a part of, you'll know what this means. And whether that's insulting or not is completely up to your interpretation. This is a typical PJ Flex season, and in my personal opinion, that's why I'm on here. I think that's pretty good. And then when I look at the circumstances, if you look at everything in hindsight, I think it's really good. I think we're going to go over some clear flaws here. But what I like about Minnesota were about at the time the portal is going to close, they're returning a lot of their core from this team. So you could really look at this year as a building block for 2026. Now we don't know what that will look like, but I think there were a lot of good moments from the season for Minnesota. I believe their over under was 6.5 or 7.5. So exceeded expectations in that sense if you include the bowl win. And PJ Fleck, I must say, that 7-0 bowl record is pretty amazing.
And there's definitely something to that. And I don't think this team was as good as their record, and I'm sort of meaning it as a compliment. Like, they won a lot of close games. They fell to California early, but they beat Rutgers by 3, Purdue by 7, Michigan State by 3 in overtime, Wisconsin by 10, and they won their bowl against New Mexico in overtime. So, like, PJ Fleck and the staff got pretty much everything that they could out of this season, I think. Their losses, the three toughest games that they played at it was really tough that their three road games are against three of probably the top five teams in the league in Ohio State, Oregon, and Iowa. And they didn't really compete in any of those 42 to 3, 41 to 3, and 42 to 13. So there's a clear, gap between them and where they want to be, either in the playoff or on the doorstep of the playoff, like Iowa. But they were able to beat teams below them here. They were able to get that big win against Nebraska, which was a pretty cool moment there, and that sort of took the wind out of the Cornhuskers' sails for the season. But Joe, I think they got everything out of the season, but they still showed that there is a long way to go.
Yeah, I completely agree with that shot. I think the one we didn't mention, we mentioned the Cal loss, the Northwestern loss at Wrigley. I think
Yeah.
that's a game they definitely won back. I think probably 8 out of 10 times, if you play out that fourth quarter, Minnesota ends up winning that game, especially with a healthy Darius Taylor. So this could easily be a 9-win football team with that schedule would be extremely impressive. But looking at the reality here, Sean, to me, this is just a well-coached team. And as you indicated, winning all those close games, I thought they definitely should have lost that Michigan State game for, as an example, the first weekend of November. And that's one thing I think going forward, Minnesota's going to rally on. They win these close games and they beat teams they're clearly better than, even if they have an off day. And I don't think you could have said that about PJ Flex teams from 2000 uh, you know, kind of after that 2019, they kind of went through that little lull period. One thing I will say that's been said about the PJ Fleck era, and I think it's kind of a Mickey Mouse criticism because I think we all know what the result would have been, was that they never won the Big Ten West and ended up going to Indianapolis, one of the few programs in the Big Ten West, along with Nebraska. I know they went with the leaders, legends, and Illinois, who didn't cash in on that easy division, but. Other than that, Sean, the fact he's been employed in this conference for what's going to be his 10th season speaks volumes. There are plenty of guys who clearly have gotten fired or have been on hot seat. PJ has never really been on hot seat, and conversely, he's never really been on a true hot board for other jobs. So this is as stable a program. I'm not saying national title. I'm not saying Big Ten title. This is as stable a program as I can find in the Big Ten when we're going to talk about the returners here.
Yeah, it seems like they have a floor that's a little bit higher than some of the other programs around their caliber. And I do mean that as a compliment. Like, the Minnesota job is not one of the better ones in the Big Ten. It's probably in the bottom half. They're definitely in the bottom half, maybe in the bottom quarter. It's not easy to get people to go play there. Even in the age of NIL and rev sharing has made things a little bit easier up there at Minnesota between Fernico in Medved at basketball and for Fleck here in football, but they seem to just be in the middle of like everything that you could think of, Joe. They had they still have 8 wins, which is a good accomplishment, but they're all Big Ten running back was in and out with injuries all year. They had inconsistent play at quarterback between Drake Lindsay. I would say more times good than not, but at times it looked like he was one of the best QBs in the Big Ten, and at other times he was, when the competition ratcheted up, he was, looked like just any other guy. But I think stable is the right word here. In the age of NIL and transfers and coaches getting fired after 2 seasons, for better for worse, Minnesota's here to stay. Whether that's 6, 8, 7, 9 wins, it seems like they're going to be in that bracket until further notice.
Yeah. Looking ahead here, Sean, if you don't mind, kind of going through that recap. You know, the theme we discussed is not really competitive against the top end of the Big Ten, taking care of the middle and lower class of the Big Ten. One thing I'm going to tell you is you look at 2026's schedule.
And I got it up,
Do you,
so
if
yeah, I got
Yep,
it up.
and you got it up. You know, 3 games are highlighted here to me. Really four. You have at Indiana, you have Michigan at home, you have the trip to Happy Valley, and then you have at Washington. Uh, you know, Not knowing how Iowa, Wisconsin, and some of these other teams are going to be, maybe you pick off one of those four. To me, that would show a significant jump, and I don't think it's crazy talk, to be honest with you, Sean. You return Darius Taylor, you return Drake Lindsay. The Coy Parrish thing is really unfortunate. A hometown kid that's in the portal. Don't know where he's going quite yet, but safe to say he's not going to be returning to the Gophers. But this is a good core they have. They returned like half of their receiving production. They add guys in the portal there. Maybe they pick off one of these games. I think your most likely one's probably a home game against Michigan. Just because that trip out west is really tough for these teams.
And it
Uh,
depends when that game is too. I think,
yeah,
Joe, we don't have the
the
dates for the
dates.
conference
Yeah,
game yet, and the order for some reason the order that FBschedules.com has it here is the Indiana road game is listed on the top, then all the home games, then all the road games.
yeah.
So they have Mississippi State at home. They're an SEC team that is definitely in the bottom half of that league, but still can be like that's a chance for a something that we'll note next year when we do our week 2 recap, whether they beat them or not. But this year, Joe, they were 7-0 at home and 0-5 on the road. Their only win outside of Huntington Bank Stadium coming in the bowl against New Mexico. So obviously, we saw Washington do that last year. They looked to take the step. Didn't happen to a small degree. Maybe we could see that here. Iowa, Michigan are going to be teams who are going to go in there expecting to win. So maybe you can build on that great home record this year with, a win against an SEC team, maybe a win against a ranked Iowa or ranked Michigan, depending on when they come in there. And then on the flip side of it, you're trying to get a road win, which they didn't get this year. You've got 4 really tough road games. So I don't really know what. Obviously, there's no point in really thinking about how hard these schedules are in this day and age. Like at Indiana would have been seen as the easiest potential road game a few years ago. Now it's nobody's gone in there for a couple years and won.
Yeah.
So I think it's foolish to say, well, oh, they're going to go 10-2 or they're going to go 8-4 now when we don't even know what these teams are going to look like. But by the looks of it, they're going to have all their tough games were on the road this year. It appears that some of that might be a little bit different next year.
Yeah. So without previewing anything, they've come close to these games. Not this year, but Penn State in 2019, that's probably the signature win of the PJ Fleck era. They've won at Wisconsin at times when Wisconsin could have won the West, particularly 2021 comes to mind. And one thing I'll note, Sean, they've dominated Nebraska. PJ Flex totally owned that series. So this is a program that's on an elevated surface for what a lot of people around the country and certainly in Big Ten country view them as. Maybe they could like that's what next year should be about, taking that next step. And that doesn't mean playoff. Maybe if they start 6-0, you could start talking playoff. But depending on how that schedule lays out, that'll be tough. But one thing I'll say here, Sean, PJ Flex come really close to upsetting a few teams. You know, he didn't really come that close. He hasn't come close against Michigan or Ohio State yet, but the Penn States of the world, the the USCs of the world, and kind of, that after the big three, which were this year, Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, you know, I think anyone else could be fair game for him.
And I think some of these secondary rivalries, Joe, are going away next year. Like you have you had two protected rivalries the first 2 years here of this bigger Big Ten. For Indiana it was Michigan State and Purdue, and for you it was Ohio State and Michigan State. I think some of those second rivalry games are going away next year because they do not play Nebraska. Indiana doesn't. No old brass spittoon game next year for Nick Marsh against Michigan State. So maybe that's something that's a little bit unfortunate for them. Obviously, they are still going to play Wisconsin, who are their main rivals, but they don't have to go to LA. They get Washington on the road. We've talked about that many times how tough that is to go, but I think the state of the program is in a pretty solid spot, and next year I think could go a number of different directions because at the end of the day, we don't really know much about these teams, but
Yeah.
um,
But real quick, Sean, if I were going to grade the season, just doing this at the end, I'd probably give Minnesota a B, just met expectations.
yeah, I'm gonna give them a B minus. I think that they were like you said they probably should have won that Northwestern game, but at the same time they won some games that they probably should have won too. So I think this is probably one of the better outcomes at 8-5 when I think they were probably a below average team in the Big Ten. But it doesn't matter what they look like; it matters what they are. So Minnesota finishes the year 8-5, and that is our Minnesota State of the Program. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.